Denise Gwen, reading aloud for you from my novel, His Christmas Eve Proposal, Book 3 in the Medicine Women of Alaska, Chapter 12. A lumberman up at the mill had a broken leg, and another man needed an emergency appendectomy. As Paul explained it to them, Naomi followed him out to his truck. Drew handed Naomi up into the cab and jumped in after her. Paul gunned the engine, threw it into gear seconds after they settled into their seats, and peeled up the mountain. Naomi stared out the window as Paul navigated the winding roads all the way up to the camp, her thoughts focused on Drew. He'd drawn dangerously close to persuading her to reveal herself to him. He'd pressed and pressed her, asking one question after another until finally she'd decided that maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea to tell him. What would it hurt after all? She'd been holding this secret deep in her heart for all this time, and she had to admit it was a hard weight to carry. It'd begun to wear on her. She'd hoped that, by revealing her secret, she'd alleviate some of the terrible burden she'd been carrying in her heart all these years. She longed to tell him. The pressure of keeping it from him weighed on her heart each time she saw him. She wanted someone to know how deeply she hurt. And then, at the critical moment, Paul burst in. In a way, she was glad that Paul had interrupted. In another way, she was frustrated. "You okay?" Drew asked, as Paul skittered the truck over yet another pile of gravel and rocks. As she sat in silence in the dark cab, her right leg bumped up against Drew's left. With each touching, desire rippled through her, and she longed to tell him everything. But first, she had to take care of this patient. Paul careened around a bend and stopped dead in front of the lumber mill and killed the engine. She looked out the window to the right and saw a bunch of men standing around with their hands jammed in their jackets, looking unhappy. Naomi's heart surged with intensity and a desire to do a good service to her patient. Who knew, in the process of attending to him, she might yet reveal herself again as a skillful surgeon, and the gig would finally be up, and Drew would know her secret. But would she admit it to him in the face of all the overwhelming evidence? Would she ever unburden herself of this heartache? A man ran up to the cab as Paul jumped out. "You the doctors?" She slid out after Drew, and he helped her down to her feet. "Yes," she said before anyone could say anything. "I'm Dr. Schuster, and this is Dr. Rutherford. Oh, and this is Dr. Paul Rutherford, so we're all here." "We know the brothers," another man said as he approached them, "but it's nice to meet you, young lady." He studied her. "Which of the two men do you want to take care of?" A hand on her shoulder. Drew replied first. "Dr. Schuster's a top-notch surgeon, Ricky." The man looked down at her. Such a lot of skill in such a little person. He turned on his heel and walked toward the lumber mill, calling out to her, "Follow me. Bill's in a bad way." She looked up at Drew, who nodded. "Come on, doctor. Let's tend to our patient." "I'm seeing the patient who's got the burst appendix, aren't I?" she asked. Drew smiled. "That's right. The patient who needs a skillful surgeon." "Okay," she said, and gulped.